We're going live on Facebook now, and we've got enough participants. I'm going to stop sharing my slide and introduce best-selling author MJ Rose. I decided to do these historical happy hours monthly with different authors because I'd been doing some webinars on my own books and the history behind my own books, and they've been well received over the past year because of the pandemic. But I wanted to, I love supporting other authors. I love talking to other authors. And so I wanted to do something that supported other historical fiction authors, particularly right now in these crazy times. So welcome, MJ. You're my very first guest for Historical Happy Hour. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you for having me. It's such an honor to be your first guest.
Thank you. And I just adored your latest book, The Last Tiara. I think a lot of people who are listening right now know you, but I'm just going to give a little bit of intro about who you are. MJ Rose is a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today bestselling author, as well as an international bestseller. She's published more than 19 novels and 3 books on marketing. She's been published in more than 30 countries and sold over 1.5 million books, which is just amazing. She's the founder of the International Thriller Writers and the first marketing company for authors that I'm well aware of called AuthorBuzz. So thank you for coming tonight. I've got some questions for you. And then at about the halfway point, I'm going to take questions from the audience, from the Zoom audience. If you have questions, I will look in the chat window, but please consider using the Q&A window too, because I can see those quicker. Sometimes the chat window gets a little crowded, and I can pull up the Q&A quicker. So one thing I should add before when I take questions, anyone who asks a question, even if I don't get to ask it, will be entered into a giveaway to win an audiobook copy of The Last Tiara. MJ has been generous enough to offer 2 copies of the audiobook version of The Last Tiara, but you have to ask a question to be entered. So with that, MJ, I want to talk about this book. I think that I was reading an article recently about how historical fiction people are really drawn to it in times like these because it's an escape to a different time and place. And there's something comforting about that. And this book was the perfect combination of historical details and research, and it was a twisty plot and characters that I just loved learning about. So I want you to talk about, it's such a great story about your inspiration, how you first came up with this idea. And I think it started with an NPR article that you saw. Is that right?
Yes. First of all, thank you again for having me. This is such an honor, and it's so nice to see everybody out there. And yes, everybody wants to know, Fuzzle will be making an appearance, because that's really the only question anybody ever has when I show up anywhere is Fuzzle there, and she is here, and she will say hello at some point.
Awesome.
So forgive me for part of this is going to be the very beginning. I'm just going to read a little bit because I can't ever remember all the names of the people that are involved in this. So
yeah.
Actually, so sometimes you actually get birthday presents when you least expect them. And on my birthday in December of 2012, I stumbled on an NPR article that was entitled "The Mysterious Disappearance of the Russian Crown Jewels," which is like, to any author out there, I guarantee you would have stopped to and been like, oh my God, what are they talking about?
So fascinating.
So I was hooked by the first sentence, which I'm going to read, because it's like, how could you not write a book about this? The story of the missing Russian crown jewels begins, as so many great adventures do, in a library. And I was like, I still have goosebumps now reading it.
Oh, so good.
And so the article describes how in the rare book room of the U.S. Geological Survey Library, which is in Virginia, a previously unknown and unmarked 1922 catalog of photographs of the Russian crown jewels had been discovered. And I'm going to show you, I think you can see this. So this is a photograph of the Russian crown jewels, a photograph taken in 1922. What happened in 1922 was the Russian Revolution was over, the Bolsheviks were in power, they needed money for tractors, of all fabulous things. And they decided to take all these beautiful Russian crown jewels and put them in a catalog, and then send the catalog to all the countries in the world and let them auction the Russian crown jewels and buy them, and then they'd go buy tractors.
Wow.
So they hired or ordered, I don't think they actually hired him. They ordered a man named Fersman to put this catalog together. Fersman turned to Fabergé's son, one of Fabergé's sons, Anton Fabergé, and brought him in because he was a really well-known gemologist who was a very good appraiser of stones. And somebody has actually decided that it's time to come right at the beginning and interrupt the story. So here she is. There's
amazing.
and she'll just hang out here while I'm telling the story, because otherwise she'll just keep bugging me.
Right.
So Fersman and Fabergé put together this catalog. It's 100 photographs of every crown jewel that they're going to put up for auction. And this is 1922. And then they're working on it for years. And in 1925, they issue a formal catalog, which then goes around the world. And for the next, until 2012, all anybody knows is this catalog that was created in 1925. Right. But in 2012, when the story takes place, these librarians are in this library, and they come across a book, which I would show you, but it's so boring. It's just a red book without a cover, without any writing on it. And it's stuck in between all these other books that belong to George Kunz. So George Kunz is the most famous gemologist in America. He was Louis Comfort Tiffany's gemologist and went on to work with Charles Tiffany, the next generation. And George Kunz died in the 30s, and the library bought 1,000 of his books for $1 from his family. And it's the greatest collection of gemology books in the world. And they shove it in this library in Virginia, and they don't pay any attention to it. Wow. Meanwhile, Kunz also is the man who found Kunzite, the stone, and Morganite for J.P. Morgan. He's the man who helped J.P. Morgan build his gem collection, which goes on to become the basis of the gem collection of the Museum of Natural History in New York City. So he's the most important gemologist. Yes. He'd been in Russia. There's a great story about when he went to Russia during this time to look at these crown jewels, he carried a gun because it was so frightening. And so this whole collection goes into this library. And then in 2012, they're looking through these books, and somebody notices a slim volume, and they pull it out and they open it up, and they don't understand what it is because it's the same photograph. It's this same photograph that I showed you is in the front of the book. And so the Fersman catalog is very famous now. There are only 70 copies of it. It goes off at auction every once in a while. Wow. For tens of thousands of dollars. So these librarians look through this book, and they're comparing it to the 1925 volume. And they discover that there are 4 items in the 22 book that are not in the 25 book. A brooch, which I have a picture of, which is quite astonishing, a diamond and sapphire brooch. Amazing. And a emerald and gold necklace, and a sapphire and diamond bracelet, and the tiara, which is the best piece, the sapphire and diamond tiara. Incredible. So they then start researching. They find the brooch is sold at an auction in 1927. None of the other 3 pieces can be found. They're all missing. Still the necklace isn't that important. The bracelet's beautiful, but no big deal. But a missing tiara to the jewelry world is a really big deal, especially one that has this kind of amazing detail, these giant sapphires, these briolette cut diamonds. Tiaras are such a magical, alluring kind of piece of jewelry. And they know that there's a sketch of this tiara from the late 1800s. They believe the tiara was made for the Empress Maria, not the Empress, the Tsarina Maria, who is Nicholas's mother. But they don't have any facts about it at all. So that was it. I just decided that no one knows where it is. They haven't known where it is since 1922. That was perfect because it allowed me to have some real stuff to write about that was real, and also go off on a tangent and make up a story that couldn't be proven or disproven. And that's what I really like, to find things that are rooted in some kind of reality, but not just tell a story that already existed.
Exactly. Yes. And you do such an amazing job at it. And I love the origins and the premise and And one thing again, like one of the things I love about reading historical fiction is learning aspects of history that I kind of knew or learned about in school, but haven't really revisited it in a long time. And I was really fascinated with all the stories of Sophia, who is Isabel's mother. And actually, to back up, tell me like the two main characters and the premise of the book based on the research first.
So in 1948, Isabel Moon, who is an architect, who is in New York. Her mother, Sophia Moon, has recently died. Isabel's never known her father. Her mother's always said that they came over from Russia when Isabel was a little girl. She escaped the Bolshevik Revolution, came to New York, opened up an antique shop. They live in a brownstone on the Upper East Side of New York. And Isabel has inherited her mother's apartment. She's recently been in a car accident. And Isabel, as an architect, is going to renovate the apartment. She's in her mother's bedroom. I actually have that. I can read this opening part also.
Oh, that would be
she's in
great.
her mother's apartment and she's renovating the apartment, and she pulls down the wallpaper in the bedroom. And behind the wallpaper is a niche. And in the niche is a rounded leather box about 8 or 9 inches long and 5 inches high, and receipts from a jeweler for a dozen diamonds of various sizes are with this box. And the discovery puts Isabel on a path to learn the tiara's fate and offer clues to her parents' hidden past. And so it's a dual timeline with Sophia Moon in Russia during the revolution, Isabel, which is 1915 to 1917, Isabel in New York in 1948. And I don't usually read, but I like to read this one part of her actually opening the box. So she says, I get a knife from a drawer and gently work the box's hinge, careful not to damage it. After a few moments, I feel it give. I lift the lid and expect to find anything at all or nothing at all. The inside, though, is lined in cream-colored silk, and sitting in a half-circle depression is a piece of open-work metal. I'm not sure what I'm looking at. Lifting it out, I turn it one way and then the other. I run my finger over the lacework of what appears to be silver and feel tiny metal points sticking up. One is sharp enough to scratch my skin. A tiny drop of blood beads on the surface. I put my finger into my mouth. I realize the points must be prongs pried up to remove the stones, but no one bothered to push them back down. I don't understand. Why did my mother keep this skeleton when she sold the diamonds it held? What good was the silver frame? Why did it mean so much to her that she kept this remnant? And if it meant so much, why had she sold it and never told me about it? So that's really the very beginning of the book. And so we go back and forth learning Sophia's story as Isabel is researching the tiara. And then Isabel goes through her own story and meets her own people and has her own little adventure.
Yes, and I loved the going back and forth. I love the different perspectives. And I was really, so to get back to my question, tell me about the research you did on the Russian Revolution. And, you have such great descriptions of first of all, of how horrific the conditions were for the people, but then all of this amazing artwork and jewelry that was stolen or disappeared or hidden during that time period. So what kind of research did you do for that very important aspect of the story?
So as often as I can when I do research, I only want to read source material. I really don't want to read somebody's interpretation if you can. I mean, I have one book that takes place in ancient Egypt. Part of it takes place in ancient Egypt, and it's not possible. But with everything else, I really try to do what I can find. So all my research was people who lived through the revolution. And I also should say that my great-grandparents were, on both sides, were from Russia.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
My great-grandfather on my mother's side, actually in the 1860s, was actually the man who repaired the clocks in the Tsar's palace.
Amazing.
So there was a lot of stories. Actually, I have this necklace on, which I wore when I was writing the book. I always have a piece of jewelry. It's an excuse to get a piece of jewelry when I start a new book, but It has to have something to do with it. So this necklace, for anybody who's read the book, has the little Russian eggs that Sophia had, that her lover gives her. But I also have a coin on the necklace that you can't see even if I held it up, but I have a Russian gold coin that was my great great-grandfathers that has passed down in the family that's
Wow.
dated 1860. So this is what I wore the whole time. I kind of feel like I channel these stories, that I don't really make them up, but like people who are dead tell me the stories. So first I
Awesome.
read all the source material, and the source material was really brutal
I'll
for this
bet.
book because I was reading the descriptions of what life was like in Russia. One of the most interesting pieces of source material, and I know this is a dirty word and I'm very political, so I tell you this with fear and trepidation, but the novelist Ayn Rand wrote a book called We the Living, which is not about America. It's not about capitalism. It's about Russia during the revolution because she escaped it. And she wrote what it was like for her as a young girl to live in Bolshevik Russia and what her parents went through and how they lost their family and everything they owned. So that was a very helpful book. I'm not claiming that I'm attached to Ayn Rand or her capitalism or anything else, but as a historical piece of
Yes.
literature, it was really helpful. I read diaries of professors who I based my professor on in the book, who had it a little easier. People who were teachers were still teachers. The Bolsheviks believed very much in education. So if you were a teacher of any kind, you had it easier than most people. So Sophia's parents,
Right.
Sophia's
Right.
father's a professor, and Sophia's mother, and this is also based on fact, Sophia's mother is the tutor to the Tsar's children. And that's all based on an actual book written by the Tsar's, a teacher to the Tsar's children, who went with them to their final, to the place where they were finally executed. And that's an amazing book, and that was very helpful. The Tsar's family was very, very tight, very loving. They cared about each other an enormous amount. They had quite a wonderful family, the tight-knit, the girls, the four girls and the son. So that was also very helpful.
Very cool. Very interesting. Fascinating. Just fascinating. Another aspect of the story that you wove in another piece of history that is not related to Russia, that I thought was so interesting. And if you could tell us a little bit more about it, Isabel, the daughter who's the architect, goes to Oak Ridge, Tennessee for an architecture job where she's essentially helping build this city. And it turns out the city is tied into the Manhattan Project. Scientists are living there and doing research for the Manhattan Project, which eventually led to the atomic bomb. And I thought that, I thought the Russian history was fascinating, but then you pull that in and I was like, I had vaguely heard of Oak Ridge, but didn't know that much about it. And I thought, what an interesting choice to make, and what made you decide to include that?
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I never know. I mean, I just don't know where it's from. The hardest part of writing a book for me is creating characters who feel real. The easiest part for me is doing the research. And when I write, I put on Gregorian chants and I write the movie that I see in my head. That's how I write.
Me
the
too.
first draft. You too?
Yeah.
It's amazing how many authors do this. So, but before I get there, I probably do anywhere from 3 months to a year of research. And while I'm doing the research, I'm keeping a journal for my main characters, plural, to try to build them and make them real. And so part of making them real is giving them a life history. And with Isabel, we're going to talk about this later, but I'm very interested in strong women, especially in time periods where it was really tough to go into careers that didn't accept women. And architecture is one of those careers that's been very hard for women to break into. Even in the 1960s, women were still having a hard time. So I thought it would be interesting to make Isabel an architect at a time period where that would be a struggle for her. And I was doing research on what jobs architects had and what architecture was like in the 1940s, and stumbled on all this stuff about the Manhattan Project. So basically the Manhattan Project was created by the government to build the atomic bomb. And the way that they did it was they built 3 separate cities in 3 separate places: Oak Ridge in Tennessee and Los Alamos. And I always forget the third city. Because I didn't write about it. But what happened was, in each city they built a different part of the bomb, and nobody in any city knew what the other people were doing in the other cities. But the cities were completely built from scratch, like in no time. Libraries, movie theaters, hospitals, housing for all the people that live there, and families moved in, and there were 3 different kinds of housing. But the architects and the engineers moved into these places, put these cities up in months. And I made Isabel one of those architects. There was not a woman architect there at the time. I may have her work for Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, which is a real architecture firm in New York, in the world. Yeah. At the time it was in New York and Chicago, and they did build Oak Ridge. So I put her in there, and I made her one of the architects that went to Oak Ridge. And that enabled her to have, the book has a lot to do with secrets. That enabled Isabel to have a past and have some secrets that she's struggling to overcome. They say that every author, and I wonder what yours is, every author has a theme that they can't get rid of no matter how hard they try. And mine is secrets. The characters all have shadowy secrets. And I'm like, I'm going to write a book without any secrets, and it just doesn't happen.
But that makes for good storytelling, right? Because you always have, like, people have other agendas and different things going on behind the scenes. So that, so interesting.
I wanted to give her a complicated past and also some guilt. Because what I read about Oak Ridge was, and all the secret cities, was everybody who worked in these cities really had guilt, knowing that they were helping build an atomic bomb that eventually killed thousands and thousands of people. And that was an important part of Isabel's mindset when she goes into this thing and discovers that her mother too had secrets. Yes. Yeah. And it was, and yeah, I mean, I can't even imagine how they lived with that for the rest of their lives, the people that worked on these cities, because that's a lot of difficulty. I interviewed some people who worked at the cities and not necessarily built them, but who worked in other capacities. It was just an anniversary of the building of the city of Oak Ridge, and they had a big exhibition mostly online, but they had a lot of things. And I talked to a lot of people that were involved in it, and there was just a lot of guilt. Pride and guilt at the same time. I can't imagine. Yeah, incredible. So another question I had, you talk about this group that was so fascinating to me in the book that I had to look it up to see if it was real or not. And it turns out it is not real. And it's called the Midas Society. And I thought of them as this, like, secret, mysterious, like, jewelers who track down missing jewelry. And I thought that was so great. And I was kind of hoping it was real, but it's not. So I like creating societies, and, like, I've done this several times. And then I write several books that use that. They're standalones, but then they take advantage of this thing I've created. The first one was a series of books about a sex therapist that worked at a place called the Butterfield Institute, which is a sex therapy institute. And there were 4 books about that. And then I did the Phoenix Foundation, which was an institute dedicated to the study of reincarnation. And I did 6 books about that. So now I've done the Midas Society, and there will be more books that that have to do with the Midas Society. And they're sort of inspired by all of the the World War II reparation groups that are determined to give things back to the Jewish people who lost them during the war. But this isn't related to World War II or Jewish. In the Midas Society goes way back to the 15th and 16th century. And it's jewelers, curators, art gallery owners, dealers, anybody related to selling anything in the arts. And they take a vow that if anything crosses their desk that might be stolen, they will not sell it until they investigate whether or not it was indeed stolen. And if it was, make every effort to return it to whoever it belonged to before they agree to sell it. And it was really fun naming it, because it was named after Midas, of course, who was so greedy that he turned his own daughter into gold. And I thought that would just sounded right. And so I'm going to stick with that. I don't normally talk about the next book I'm writing, but the Midas Society plays a very big role in it. Oh, I love it. That's great, because I loved that aspect of it. So that's so fun. Yeah. Such a great idea. And they're headquartered in the south of France. So fun. On this little island where where the Man in the Iron Mask was supposedly held. And they're of course they're there so I can keep going back, because of course you have to keep researching where the Midas Society imaginary building is. So and in the south of I mean, who wouldn't want to research in the south of France? That's perfect.
Okay, so next question. You touched on this a little bit about how both Sophia in Russia and Isabel in New York are strong women that were really ahead of their time in terms of their careers, and they were in careers that were in fields dominated by men, and in some ways are still dominated by men. And talk to me about how you chose their career paths.
Yeah. So I grew up in New York City, and my grandmother was a painter and my mother was a photographer, and they're both really strong women. And I was surrounded by strong women growing up. New York women, I was in advertising, which women were totally acceptable. And I went to an all-girls school until 12th grade. And I actually didn't know, it sounds kind of crazy when I say it, but I never experienced anything at all that I couldn't do something because I was a woman. It just, when you go to an all-girls school, any job you want to have in that school, you can have. It's just, you have to be good at it, but you don't not get it because you're a woman,
right,
or a girl. So, and that's how I was raised. And I really had to learn about how women were treated when I went to college. And then I came back to New York and went into advertising, and it still wasn't real to me. I was a creative director, the youngest creative director in advertising at the time, when I was 26 years old. So this whole thing about how women aren't treated well and they're subservient and they don't get ahead is really foreign to me. And so I gravitate to women like this, and I'm kind of fascinated on a personal level that I somehow missed it completely. And also, I don't know how to write about another kind of woman. I'm not interested in writing about another kind of woman. Not that I don't have sympathy for her, but she's very foreign to me. I don't write a lot of books about young married people with babies because I haven't had a child. I don't think you have to write what you know, but there's a certain mindset that I really don't have any connection to. Just like most of my characters are creative. Most of my main characters are creative.
Mm-hmm.
I've never written about a doctor,
Right.
So it's just a very personal thing. And I think it's really important for me as an author to put out somewhat aspirational fiction. I think that it matters to me that people can admire the characters, even if they're bad, that you can still admire something about them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like writing women who achieve things.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it was so interesting. And learning about those fields at the time was really interesting too. So to stay on the subject of the mother and the daughter, this is a dual narrative, as you said. And I'm just in awe of people who write dual narratives, because I write very linearly. And talk to me about, like, do you write one story at a time? Are they woven in together from the beginning? How do you?
I haven't done a lot of them, and it was I hadn't written one in a long time. It was very challenging. The last one I had written had a journal, like an old journal that was interspersed with a modern day story. But this was the first time in a long time that they're two totally separate stories.
Yes.
And I was petrified.
Yes.
And what I did was, and actually this turned out to be really easy. So when you want to do one in your next book, this is the trick, and it's really simple.
Okay.
You just write two separate novels.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering.
And then you write the second story. And then you read them both, and then you start braiding them together. And then you have to rewrite some stuff to really make the braiding work time-wise, right. Stretch something out or pull something back. But it really was fun to then braid them together. And the other part that's really fun, that you'll get this as an author, is neither of them are that long, right? Each one's only like 150
Oh, yeah,
pages.
that is true. Yeah,
so
yeah.
You get to write sort of like a novella, and then another novella, and then you just mix them up and you wind up with a novel. So that part was really fun.
You make it sound very easy. I don't know if it's as easy as you make it sound, but it worked beautifully for this particular story, and I loved it. Sometimes I feel like dual narratives take you too much back and forth out of place, but I loved the way you weave them together. I thought it was so great.
Well, you just have to be willing to really edit like crazy when you weave them together.
Yeah,
I think that's where it goes wrong. Is there's a saying for people out there who aren't writers: kill your darlings, which means sometimes it's our favorite stuff that we write that we have to cut. But that was part of the critical. I underwrote both stories, which I think was very helpful. So each one was only 100 pages when I wrote it.
Okay.
I wove them together and then I added, so I didn't have to kill a lot.
Yes.
Other people I know who do it, who overwrite, then they get stuck and they don't want to cut it.
Yes.
So by underwriting it, it really made it easier. Try it next time.
I don't know.
It's real fun. No,
I'll
really
think about it. I'm going to ask you one more question. I could talk to you all like for hours, and then I'm going to take some questions from the audience, because there's a bunch of them in the Q&A window. Just tell me a little bit about your writing process, and has it evolved since your first novel, or is it pretty much the same? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah. It's pretty much the same. A really big part of my processes are these journals that I keep that have everything in them, from colors that the people, I have to, as I said, it's really hard for me to create these characters. So I really have to work hard with the journals they're the characters' journals. I interview them, I talk to them, I hate them because the characters really struggle to come to life for me. And I'm going through that now with two characters who I'm just like pulling out my hair because they're not coming alive.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I spend usually 3 to 6 months doing the journal. While I'm doing the journal, I'm just reading everything I can. Also, when you ask me about source material, and I also read fiction written at the time by people who were living then.
Oh, that's great.
I also find very helpful to put myself in that mindset.
Yep.
So when I'm done with the journal, I put all the research away. I put the journal away. And I sit down and I start writing the novel on the computer for the most part. I've written a couple by hand, but the process is always the same. It's always early in the morning before the day starts, usually 6:30 or 7. I put on Gregorian chants, a cup of green tea in my office, totally silent, nobody's awake. And I write until I've done 1,000 to 1,500 words every day. Sometimes I take one day off a week, but the goal is to write. It's a disgusting expression, but the goal is to vomit out a first draft.
I get it.
I don't reread what I'm writing. I don't have any idea what I'm writing. And it's so much so that when it's all done and I print it out and I read it, I have to read it usually 3 or 4 times. I don't recognize half of it. It's like,
amazing.
Like I can change a character's name 4 times and not even realize I did that.
Yeah.
And I read stuff and I'm like, wow, where did that come from? I have no memory of writing. And I can look back at any book I've written and look at a page, and I absolutely don't remember writing a word. I don't know where it comes from. I just know I see the movie, I write down what I'm seeing, I'm done for the day, and I don't think about it again.
Amazing.
I edit 4 or 5 drafts. I have a freelance editor that I've worked with for 7 books now. She's my beta reader, and she was my editor at Atria for a while, and then she left, and I kept her on. And so she's my first reader, and then we work on the draft together. She's brutal, and she's also brilliant and creative. Oh. And she often comes up with stuff that's like, oh wow, I didn't even see that.
Oh,
in Tiffany Blues, I had done the whole book, and she said, but isn't this guy the guy who did this? And I was like, oh my God, no, I didn't know that, but he has to be. So Sarah's amazing.
Oh, editors, good editors are just worth their weight in gold. They're so great. That's excellent. Yeah. All right, I think that we're ready to, we have a bunch of questions here, and I'm going to pull some up. Oh, this is a great one from Glennie Richa. What was the last information known about the actual tiara? It's still lost. Are there any theories about where it could be?
No, there's absolutely nothing known about the tiara. The last thing it was a mysterious tiara to begin with, because when they had it in 1922, and there's a picture of it in the book, there are no other pictures of it. Like with a lot of the Russian crown jewels, you'll see the picture in the catalog, but then you can find pictures of the Tsarina wearing it. This one, there are no pictures of anybody wearing it. There's just this one sketch from 1889 that they believe is that tiara. It's a watercolor. They don't made it sure, and they don't know anything about it. So there literally has never been anything known about it. And so it's not even like, when was the last time anyone knew anything about it? Nobody knows anything about it. Amazing. And it's never surfaced, which the theory is that it either was taken apart for parts. I mean, they took things apart and sold the individual stones. And this had very large sapphires and diamonds in it. So one theory is they just pulled it apart and stole the stones. The other theory is a lot of jewels were buried in the Revolution, in World War I, in World War II, and there's some great stories that I could take up the whole time telling you about jewels that have been buried and found later. So there's still the possibility that this was buried or hidden by somebody and just hasn't been found yet.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, just fascinating. There's another question here related to that. Rose DeLuc asked, I love reading about the jewels, especially the priceless missing jewels. Do you know the net worth of the missing pieces at today's fair market value? Do you have any idea?
Oh, that's so interesting. So there's a woman named Rose Tozer, who is the head of the library where the book was found. And the Fersman catalog, which is the 25 catalog, is one of her specialties. And she's one of the people that I did endless research with on all of this stuff about the jewels. And we don't know what they were worth at the time. She's estimated what they might be worth now, but it's very hard because she didn't have any actual facts about what those sapphires, what they actually were, like how much did they weigh and what quality were they.
Yeah.
That picture, and that picture is all that exists. You just can't tell. So we don't know what they were worth. We make a guess in the book. I mean, she made the guess and I used it in the book of what it would have been sold for in the 1930s or 40s. But there's also, the stones would be worth one thing, but if the tiara was still intact and the provenance of the tiara was that it belonged to the imperial family, it would go through the roof of what it would be worth.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So it's worth different things if it's apart or if it's together.
Interesting. So I'm just reading some more questions here. Oh, this is a good one. Have you been to Brompton Cemetery to see the monument to Hannah Courtroy? And how did you decide to connect to her? That's from Darlene Golbitz.
Okay, so for people who haven't read the book, there's one of the secrets in the book takes you to London and one of the major cemeteries there where there's a monument. And no, I haven't been there. I'm fascinated by cemeteries and I always go visit cemeteries when I go to cities. And this was all backwards engineered where, and I don't want to give anything away, but once I knew what the tiara, the secret behind the tiara was, which is completely made up. We don't have any reason to believe that the secret that I gave the tiara is really the tiara. But once I made up the secret, then I had to figure out backwards, like who would have done what with the tiara and what was it for. So I worked it all backwards and I did things just like Googling endlessly, like monuments and cemeteries that have meaning. And I just stumbled on that one and used it. So it was really interesting, but I haven't been there. Yeah. I really want to write a book that takes place in Highgate, which is such a mysterious cemetery. And I actually have a whole idea, but who knows when I'll get to that. But that was a good question. Did the woman who asked the question, had she been there?
Darlene, have you been there to Brompton Cemetery? I'm looking up some more questions here. Someone says, Adrian Singer says, Columbia was the third city of the Manhattan Project, Columbia University. Does that sound right? No. And then someone has said it was in Washington. And Washington State, possibly.
I would know if I heard the name of the city. I know it was Los Alamos and I know it was Oak Ridge.
Yeah.
And the third one was the least famous of all of them. So I just don't remember.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up afterwards because that's fascinating.
Me too. So the next Zoom thing I know my own research, but there's so much research that goes into your head. And now I'm on a whole new book with a whole new world of research. And I can't even remember some of the characters in the Last Tiara's names.
I'm sure. Cause you just get so all in on the next thing. Right. So, yeah. Here's another one. You mentioned you choose a new piece of jewelry when writing a new book. I love that. This is from Afton Damon. Do you find you're also drawn to trying new recipes or food to match the time period or the area you're writing about? And if so, what would you recommend we indulge in while reading The Last Tiara? I think it's a book club question. So
that's a great question. And I do a lot of research about the food And I did a lot of research about what they were eating in Russia. So I don't recommend what they were eating in Russia during the revolution, because they were doing things like families were selling a mink coat for a bag of potato flour, or they were selling the samovar, the family samovar, in order to get some soap made of lard. But I would go back a little bit to the Tsar's Russia, and I would definitely suggest some nice vodka and caviar.
I was going to say that. That sounds perfect. Marcia Dusing asks, have you been to Russia yourself, where your family is from?
I haven't. I've wanted to go several times, and every time I've gotten ready to go, there's been another, like, how dangerous it is to go. So I haven't gone. And the Russia that my family knew was so long gone that it would just be like, we don't know where they lived. And, you know, it was like I said, it was like 1860 when they left. So that Russia is long gone. I know a lot about the family, but I don't know where they were. I wouldn't be able to go see anything. So.
Yeah, no, that makes total
sense. But I have been to the island in Cannes where the Midas Society is supposed to be.
I want to go there, actually.
Yeah, that's a more fun place to go.
Oh, okay. So Ann Kelsey says Hanford, Richland, Washington State was the third city of Manhattan Project. Hanford/Richland. Okay.
What was it called?
Hanford, Richland.
Wow. I that doesn't even ring a bell. So I guess I just did. It must have been like so undiscussed in the research I read. It was really, Oak Ridge was the most famous one, and Los Alamos was second. So.
Okay. Yeah. Another good, I think we have time for like 2 more questions. So Sue Nakanishi, my librarian friend from here in Massachusetts, asks, what was the hardest scene for you to write in The Last Tiara? And was it easier to write one story over the other, the mother or the daughters?
The last part first. No, it was all torture. Writing is never easy for me. I love it. I'm depressed if I'm not doing it. Really depressed if I'm not doing it. But I find it very hard. But I find it hard. And the hardest scene to write actually wasn't a scene. The hardest part of the book to write was figuring out the mystery behind the tiara. Like why did anybody want it, other than the jewels? Like, what was it? Mm-hmm. That was really complicated, and figuring that out was very difficult. I guess on an emotional level, I guess I cried a lot during the opening prologue and the epilogue. That made me cry because that was sad. So I guess that was hard in its own way. Satisfying, but hard.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm glad I'm not the only one that cries when I write.
If I don't cry at my own book, there's one book, The Secret Language of Stones. You're not supposed to have a favorite novel, but it's my favorite novel that I've ever written, because I'd always wanted to write a ghost story, and it's a ghost story. And every time I read the last chapter of that book, I weep. I mean, like, I just break down and weep, because that's one book that there's no question. I did not make up that story. That happened. And those people told me that they wanted the story to be told.
Wow.
I didn't make that book up. See, I'm really weird. The dog makes me look normal, and I'm really a strange person. I believe in reincarnation and witches, and my great grandmother was a witch. So I believe in all these strange things.
Awesome. I love it. So this is a question kind of related to your process and all of these things. And this is from Claire Gradone. I think this is the last one of the night, and we'll wrap it up. How do you interview your characters? Are you the interviewer and the interviewee, or are you like, how do you figure them out, like you were talking about?
So I went to a hypnotist, a pain specialist hypnotist, not a woo-woo hypnotist, to learn how to hypnotize myself so I could do this. So, and it's really just deep meditation techniques. It's nothing creepy. So I just do a lot of breathing, deep breathing, and relax. And there's a little process about counting backwards and going into this weird room that I've created in my head. And then I see my character there, sitting there in a chair, and I'm in a chair opposite her or him. And I literally, in my brain, ask this person questions and interview them and talk to them. Oh, and you have some animal there. Is that a cat?
This is Chippy.
Oh, If Leslie was still here, she'd be barking. But so I interview them, like talk to them in my head, not out loud. And they answer me out loud. I mean, in my head, they answer me, and I swear I don't know what they're going to say. I know it's my unconscious telling me what they're saying, but it really doesn't feel like that. It really feels like it's a real person. And I ask them, like, usually my first question is, why are you being so elusive? Because usually I only do this because they're not revealing themselves. And then they tell me why they're being so elusive. And it always works that they give me some secret piece of information that then allows me to figure out what is going on.
Your subconscious kind of, or wherever it's coming from, right?
Yeah, wherever it's coming from.
Yeah.
The boring answer is my subconscious. The exciting answer is the dead person is speaking to me from another plane.
I like that better. Yeah. Well, this has been so wonderful. I love talking to you, and thank you for being my very, very first guest.
Oh, you did a great job. I hope everybody enjoyed it, but this is going to be a great series, and wonderful. Good luck with it. I hope you're going to have to interview yourself when your new book comes out.
I know, right? Yeah, maybe my cat will do it, we'll have that. All right. Thank you so much again, MJ. And everyone, The Last Tiara is available now. Yes?
Yes.
The books are sold.
And the ebook is only $6.99. We made the ebook very affordable. So
it's only $6.99, and everywhere books are sold. And where can people reach you if they want to keep in touch? Your newsletter?
Oh, my website is mjrose.com, and you can get to me through there.
Awesome. Excellent.
Really easy to remember.
Yes. Thank you very much, MJ, and have a great night. Take care.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.